This podcast is sponsored by Capta IMS, an affordable agency management system and CRM, built by agency professionals for agency professionals. Check out the free trial and the low early adopter pricing at www.captaims.com.
And we're back. Hello, everyone. This is the Yellow Book Road podcast. We're going to jump right into it. I have Brian Ahearn as my guest today. Brian, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Nick. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I love the screen. Now you have raised the bar and the standards. I'm going to have to get something like that versus my regular Zoom background. So I love it. Good job.
I appreciate the compliment. You know, sales is all about differentiation, and this is working like a charm.
Awesome. So Brian Ahearn, let's jump right in. Who are you? What do you do? What can you tell us about those things, and why is it important?
Okay. Well, I started my insurance career when I got right out of college in 1986, stumbled into it, had no intention of really getting into it.
Brian, that doesn't happen to anyone.
Yeah, I know. It was amazing. I was the only person in the world who didn't want to be in insurance and stumbled into it. And spent more than 30 years on the corporate side with Travelers Insurance, large national carrier, obviously, and State Auto Insurance, a super regional company. Did a lot of work with independent insurance agents the last 10 or 12 years with State Auto on the sales training side, ran a corporate university. So I really got the gamut. Time in underwriting too. About the only thing I felt like I didn't do was settle a claim, but just a ton of experience. And I came across a man named Robert Cialdini, and I came across his material on the science of influence or the psychology of persuasion. And I was just fascinated by it. And it became the underpinning of all the sales training that I was doing for more than a decade while I was with State Auto. And I always knew, Nick, that when I came across that material, the light bulb came on, and I thought, this is what I want to do with the rest of my career. And I always had a vision of I'd leave the corporate side and do this consulting and training and speaking full time on this topic. And I made that choice about 2.5 years ago and have loved it. And now I have an opportunity to work with all kinds of insurance companies, insurance agencies. I do some work outside of insurance, but everything revolves around teaching people about the psychology of persuasion. How do you take research from social psychology and behavioral economics, bring it into your communication to make it easier for people to say yes to you?
Yeah, and we met at a very coincidental point because we were introduced not too long after I had heard about Mr. or Dr. Cialdini. He's a professor. He created some sort of certification program. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Let me go look and see what it is. I started digging in, and lo and behold, Brian, I didn't qualify. They created their own, that whole thing, they've created their own sense of scarcity with mm-hmm. that. And like 2 weeks later, you were introduced to me, and I saw that you had the certification for this. Can you talk a little bit about that certification? Sure. I think that's very important for those that are listening that are of an insurance bent, to try to understand that the persuasion that we're talking about is not like snake oil salesmanship type of thing. These are like the natural human instincts of how to get a human to do something they may naturally not be inclined to do. Right. And some of the techniques are fairly straightforward and simple, but tell us about the certification, because I think that's going to really set the stage for how we set the rest of this conversation, and what companies that work in the insurance sphere, what they can do, like you said, to increase sales and get people to say yes.
Okay. Well, to set the stage, Dr. Robert Cialdini was a Regents Professor Emeritus for more than 3 decades at Arizona State University. He's the most cited living social psychologist on the planet when it comes to the understanding of the influence and persuasion process. And I use those terms quite often interchangeably, but that research into what causes another person to say yes and take action, or as Aristotle did say, it's the art of getting somebody to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do if you didn't ask. So, people have their own priorities and goals, and they're doing things, and employees or agents, everybody's kind of got their own stuff they're doing. And quite often we have to communicate with them to try to change that behavior. So Cialdini is the most cited living social psychologist on this. He is the guru. And I had the good fortune of being able to study under him. The certification process, I went to Arizona, went through his 2-day workshop, knew that this is what I wanted to do with my career. Was able to persuade my boss at State Auto to send me back and allow me to go through this certification process. So there was a lengthy interview form that had to fill out. I mean, they wanted to know who you are and what's your background and your education, what kind of market would you have to tap into. And I was fortunate that State Auto placed a premium on training, and we were doing a lot with our agents. So I had a huge market to say, hey, I can go after these and teach them within a sales context, these principles of persuasion. So I was accepted, went out to Arizona, spent 4 days with Dr. Cialdini and his partner, Dr. Gregory Neidert, and learned firsthand from them why they designed the workshops the way they do, how they teach it, why they do all of these interesting things. Then we had to do teach backs, and that was intimidating when you're teaching back to the guy who literally wrote the book. Lengthy psychology test, and then had to go through, actually do a workshop and get certified that I understood how to deliver the material. So it was a lengthy process. You mentioned the word scarcity and influence at work, his organization. They put a premium on that. That's one of the principles of influence. They want to know that the people who handle their material do so in a way that is going to make them proud, because we're handling, decades of research from Cialdini and Neidert and so many others, and they want to know that we're putting it out there the right way, and they want to see how people are benefiting from that. So they keep a very tight-knit group. It's less than 24 people around the world, and I'm very lucky that I'm the only person in the insurance space who has that designation.
That's incredible. Like so they're going to keep the riffraff out. I'm pointing at myself here, but it's quite interesting. I kind of want to launch forward with, you mentioned State Auto and you mentioned agents, and that is a big part of what I would like to focus this podcast on. Not only this episode, but all of the future ones as well, is for companies that do have an agency system, right? They use agents to sell insurance. I almost see like what you've just gone through, and the ability to kind of transfer that knowledge to the agency system. That's a differentiator. As far as I'm concerned, I don't see a lot of that. Can you talk about how you have been using that? Like, so what is part of the process to kind of tie the carrier agent relationships stronger by being able to educate them, by being able to train them on these principles?
Well, I was very fortunate that when I was with State Auto and I was in the sales department, we had a program called the Pacesetter program. And I'm sure that if many agents who listen to this podcast have probably heard of it, because it was the premier training program in the insurance industry. It's been around for more than 20 years now, and they've probably produced for their agencies close to $1 billion in premium over that time with the agents that they trained. And what I took away from, as I watched Ken Fields and Diane Masterson administer that program was not a State Auto program. You were going to learn skills that would help you sell any of the companies that you represented. They felt that if we had the right products and the right price, we were going to get our fair share. Reciprocity, that feeling of giving back, that those agents who went through that program really felt a sense of connection and would do what they could to place most of their best business, but they could place it with anybody. And I think agencies really, what they don't want is an insurance company coming out and just giving them training that's specific to all of their programs, because that's only one of maybe a dozen or 24 companies. They want skills that will apply across the board when they're dealing with their customer, when they're negotiating with their underwriter. And if you can give them that kind of skill set, you will get your fair share. Your agents will be growing more, and it's an everybody wins situation.
Yeah. And this could be a way for carriers to really distinguish themselves, right? Going forward is not just training, but resources, right? So I can think of a lot of situations where the carrier having a lot of data could be like, hey, let's help our policyholders with risk management. You know, like if that relationship gets solidified, it makes the agency better business people
Right.
overall, right?
Insurance companies are always talking about their agents as partners. I mean, that term is probably too loosely thrown around, because a lot of insurance agents come back and say, you know, to the company, you're unilaterally making decisions. If there were really a partnership, you'd probably be asking us how we feel about whatever these changes are that are coming down the pike. So if it is going to be a partnership, it's got to be something that's going to ultimately benefit both parties. And I think when you're giving a universal skill like the ability to ethically influence people, agents are going to be able to utilize that to run a better business, not just because they can sell more, but because they understand how to ethically influence their clients, again, their underwriters, the claim reps that they're working with, the vendors that they deal with. All of those entail persuasive conversations where they're trying to get people to do things. So again, you give a skill like that to an agency and they are better off. You get the byproduct of that. As long as you've got the right products and competitive rates, you will get your fair share from that.
Yeah, but I think it goes further than that. It's the right product, competitive rates. It sounds like in this type of training, what the carrier offering the service to the agent and collecting feedback almost invariably means that the agency themselves can kind of distinguish themselves by providing feedback on what those coverage changes might mean to the book or to a future potential book, what those rate increases or rate decreases might mean for that. And I think that's missing. I don't see that a lot. I'd be curious as to what you've seen, and perhaps talk about some of the better relationships you were able to kind of tie together between State Auto and different agencies. What sort of characteristics did you see that made it worthwhile for both sides? What was the give and take on those, and which agencies were best prepared, right, to kind of step up and be one of the top agencies, not only just production wise, but partnership wise when it comes to working with a carrier?
Well, during my time there, a premium was always placed on relationships with the agents. And when I was with the Travelers, that wasn't necessarily the case. The Travelers, though, had lots of things they could offer agents that maybe other carriers could not. But when I went over to State Auto, I was really surprised, frankly, at the depth of the relationship and the willingness to listen and be flexible. When that agent would come back and say, here's what we think we're going to need, we want to give you this account, and they would find a way to do it. It wasn't so cut and dry by the numbers. And I remember that when one of the CEOs retired and the next one came on board, he made a comment after 100 days, and he said, I've never worked with an insurance company where I've seen, and the word was affection, where there's so much affection for the company. He said, I go to these meetings and people walk right by me and they hug their underwriter and they hug their territory managers. And that was very different for this person, having come from a larger East Coast company. So that was really, I think, the foundation. When you have great relationships and strong trust, you will get the benefit of the doubt. And even when you're not necessarily the most competitive or things are tough, agents are willing to hang in there with you. And then when things start turning around, they're willing to make that turn with you. But if you don't have that relationship, then it just sets it up that they're going to go to whatever carrier they see as maybe having the lowest rates or something like that. So the relationship, and every agent listening to this knows it too, because they know how a strong relationship can overcome mistakes, can keep clients even when things become difficult, that can help them sell when a price increase goes up, even if they have to move it internally. They know the value of that. In psychology, we call it the principle of liking, that it's easier for us to say yes to people that we know and like. So to me, that was the biggest factor. And once that relationship was established, the agents really felt like they could be very honest with even the most senior level people up to the CEO about what it is that they needed. And there was a culture when I started there that they would have these open forums, and the senior level executives would always spend a lot of time truly listening to agents and letting them know that they heard that. So to me, that was the differentiator at that point in time when I was with the company.
Well, you brought up the word foundation. What if you were, and you get hired by a lot of carriers to come in? I'm sure they're probably very focused on the production side of stuff because that's where business is and that's what we should be talking about. But you brought up the word foundation. And without the foundation, a lot of the tactics and strategies just won't kind of stick. Can you talk a little bit about foundation and perhaps tie the influence piece of it? Because, to me, I think likability is very important. It shouldn't be phony, right? And there's a part of that where if you can't execute on just being likable, that solves a lot of problems, like you said, that could kind of manifest itself over time. You can develop the benefit of the doubt when you're doing that. Talk about foundation a little bit and how carriers should be thinking about setting the foundation.
Well, I always tell people, you won't necessarily make the sale because somebody likes you, but you'll almost never make a sale if they don't like you, right? And that's why it becomes foundational. If you don't have that, you're not going any further. And I think that's true if you're an underwriter in terms of having a great relationship with the agents that you support. I think it's incredibly important when you're settling claims to quickly build, maybe not relationship because they can be very short conversations, but rapport to where you're feeling a connection with that person. When I'm talking about these principles of influence, and we use the word principles, I always steer clear of talking about tactics and strategies, because if they're principles, that means they are foundational to how you see humans and how you interact with them. And I think that the starting point is always that principle of liking. But Nick, it's not about me getting you to like me. It's really about me coming to like you. And the same things that would make you like me will make me like you. So for example, if we find out we cheer for the same football team, or we have the same pet, or we went to the same college, whenever we find something that we have in common, it is very natural for you to like me a little bit more. But it also becomes natural for me to like you. If I can find something that is worthy of a compliment and I pay you that compliment, of course you feel good, your endorphins are flowing. But also what happens to me is I start thinking, Nick's a good guy, because the more good things I see in you, the more highly I think of you. And so the real key for this is not to try to get your agents to like you, or the person you're settling the claim with, or that potential customer. The mindset should always be, I want to like the people that I support internally in my agency or my company. I want to like the customers that we deal with. I want to like the vendors that we interact with. And that really rests on me and my decision to look for what we have in common and pay compliments as two very basic ways of doing that. Now, the reason this is so key is if you really start to sense, hey, that guy Brian likes me, you become so much more open to whatever I might ask of you. Because deep down, you believe friends do right by friends. Yeah. But the good news too is, because I do come to like you, I really do want your best. And we have what I call a virtuous cycle where I'm putting out what I really believe is in your best interest, and that's how you're receiving it. And even if you have to tell me, well, no, Brian, that's probably not right for me, you still know that I'm looking out for your best interest, and I receive it differently too. So that's why I think this is the foundation. If more people would lay hold of this, so many other problems would be so much easier to solve.
Do you think there's a false sense of security in on both sides, carriers and agents, thinking that the other side likes them, or they're likable?
I don't know that they probably focus on that enough. I don't know that agents are probably looking at their underwriter and going, Joe or Sally, I know they really like me and they have my best interest at heart. I think if they did, they would be more open to what those underwriters have to suggest in terms of policy pricing conditions, et cetera. And I'm not sure, having worked at a company, how much, and again, I'll just use underwriters as an example, that they're looking at that agency and saying, that person has our back. It's not the norm. I don't think it's the norm from what I saw in 30 plus years. There are some agents that are that way, but it wasn't enough of a norm for the company to, I think, really look at agents that way. But we can all make that choice.
Okay, so when you were on the sales side, right? there, of course, there had to be agencies that you liked and appreciated better than others. Can you talk about what might have distinguished those? Right, the ones that you were like, oh, I either really don't like them, or I don't like working with them. There was like something about them that just made you hesitant versus the ones where you kind of did adore them. Can you try to delineate what the difference might have been between those two styles of agencies?
I think the biggest factor, again, would go back to that rapport that you would have with the agent, where you could have pleasant conversations, you could talk about your family, or you'd ask about what's important, or they remembered something that was important to you, but you got to that personal side of selling versus the one who just called up and wanted to get right down to business. And I know we hear this a lot. Don't take it personal, it's just business. But the reality is, and I share studies when I do workshops on what a difference connecting with people and really coming to like them can actually make. And when people start to see the research, their eyes light up and they're like, wow, I had no idea that it was that important. And so all of a sudden they're recognizing I need to spend more time on the relational side, because again, Nick, the more I like you, the easier it is to hang in on a tough negotiation and look for one more way to try to make this thing work. But if I don't really like you very much and you don't like me and we're just saying, hey, it's just business, it becomes real easy for you to say, Brian was unreasonable. But yeah. Meanwhile, I'm saying the same thing. Nick was unreasonable. So it's far more important than most people are willing to admit.
Yeah. And these principles can be taken internally as well within the organization. So this isn't just carriers and agents. Within the carriers, within the agencies themselves, there's the same sort of thing. I can think of, just the inherent business conflicts of underwriting versus actuarial, underwriting versus production, yep. Underwriting versus claims, marketing, and the internal conflicts there. How were you able to use some of these principles internally at State Auto, independent of your day-to-day work of working on the production and the sales side?
Absolutely. I'll give you a great example. I was asked at one point to come in and start working with the claims team, because the individual who was the chief claims officer was a big fan of Robert Cialdini and the work that I was doing. And he knew that settling claims is a persuasive conversation. So I go into the first meeting, and the individual who was running the training for claims, my sense was he was not happy that I was there. I mean, the vibe I was getting was, this is my territory. Why are they bringing the salesperson in? So it wasn't really comfortable. After a while, I told the chief claims officer, I said, hey, I'm done with the spring training, and if you need me for anything, I'm available, thinking he was going to invite me to more meetings. So he says, what I want you to do is go on the road to all the claims offices and give a 1-hour overview to associates about influence. And I want you to travel with, and it was the guy who I clearly thought didn't want me there. So the first travel that we made, and this is just a funny story, but the first travel we made, we're in the airport in Minneapolis. We go up to Starbucks. I order my drink and I say, can I have one of those little green stoppers for my coffee? Lady gives it to me. He goes up, he orders his drink, and he says, can I have one of those green stoppers? And she goes, I'm sorry, I just gave the last one to him, meaning me. Now, I'm already not feeling real comfortable. So I said, here.
Now you're stealing his stopper.
Yeah. So I said, here, you can have mine. And he's like, no, it's yours. And I go, come on, I drink my coffee fast, take it. And he wouldn't. The next week, we're going to travel again. And I'm at the airport, and he comes walking down the terminal. And I said, hey, I got something for you. And he goes, what? And I pulled out a green stick. And I said, just in case you ever need one when you're traveling. And that really broke the ice. And all of a sudden we started talking. We found out that we had things in common. I used to run marathons. He had run ultra marathons. I competed in bodybuilding and powerlifting. He had done some powerlifting in college. And we started to make these connections. By the time we ended the travels, we were like best buddies. And in fact, the irony is today, even though he's been gone from the company for years and so have I, but today I scheduled a coffee with him in April, just because I always reach out. So we went from this bad or contentious potentially relationship to great friends. And he has been such a promoter of me since I stepped out on my own. So that kind of opportunity, I think, is available for anybody in an organization where they say, you know what, I don't like that person. Abraham Lincoln once said, I don't like that man very much. I need to get to know him better. And if everybody took that tact and employed these principles that I'm talking about, they would have far better relationships. They would enjoy their job more, which means when they get home, they'd be a little happier, a little better to be around. The benefits are huge.
Yeah, we've brought up the word principle several times. Can you actually go into a few and talk about what we mean? Because I said how this isn't like snake oil salesmanship type of thing. These are, and you said it's not strategies and tactics. These are principles. These are foundational elements of how humans behave and how they want to be treated and how they may react with stuff.
Right.
Give us a few examples of these principles we've discussed several times now, but have not kind of nailed down.
So I mentioned the principle of liking, and that is, again, that if you like me, it's easier to say yes, but it's not about me getting you to like me. It's about me coming to like you. And here's another reason this is foundational. The next principle that I talk about quite often is reciprocity. And reciprocity describes that natural feeling that we have to give back to somebody when they first give to us. So I'm sure your listeners have experienced this, that maybe they invited someone to a party because they remembered, oh, they invited us to a cookout last year. Or they got a gift in the mail because somebody had sent them a gift and maybe they weren't get them one, but they'd feel kind of bad not reciprocating. So human societies across the globe raise their people in the way of reciprocity. You could use any of these principles in a manipulative way to get what you want. But if I really started with that liking principle and I'm focusing on getting to know and like you, Nick, then my giving really becomes genuine, where I'm not looking to give to get something from you. I'm looking to give because I like you and I genuinely want to help you. But in that giving, I know that if I need help down the road and you're the guy with the right skill set and the time, I feel really comfortable going back and asking for a favor. And you feel really good about doing it because I've been treating you really well and doing things for you. So this is, again, it becomes really virtuous. I help you in ways that you really appreciate. When the opportunity arises where you can help me, you want to, and we both accomplish a lot more because of that. So that's a second principle that's foundational to building relationship.
Before you go to the next one, I think a key piece of that just cannot be understated enough is that you're not giving to get.
Right.
You're giving to give.
Right.
And it's almost like a positive karma. You're working the positive karma in the spiritual world.
Right.
It's likely that you will get something back, but you don't have to, and there should be no resentment if you don't.
Yes, exactly. Because I'll give you another example today. I'm talking to a former coworker, a longtime friend, find out that his dad's like this big time musician. And my friend lives in Minneapolis. I'm thinking I got another friend who lives in Minneapolis, somebody whose podcast I've been on, and this guy's a music lover. And I'm like, man, I'm going to connect you guys. And both of them so appreciated that. I didn't do it to get anything from them, but I do know that if I needed help and Tim or Donovan were the right person, they would be glad to help me because of the nice things that I've done to try to genuinely help them. That's why it's so important, again, to start with trying to really come to know and like the other person, because then your giving becomes more natural.
Yeah.
So that's a second principle that we talk about. In our business, it's not going to be just enough to be a likable person.
Yep.
Right? You've got to bring something to the table. And so this principle of authority that we talk about, which says we will pay more attention and we are more likely to say yes to people that we view as experts or having, really good wisdom and credibility. So it's incumbent upon us then to make sure that we get that expertise in front of people. For example, if somebody went to my website, they'd see my bio page and it highlights my credentials with Cialdini and my insurance experience. Or if I went to speak at a conference, if you were running a conference, Nick, and you asked me to speak, when I would get up to speak, I would hand you a bio so that you could read about Brian Ahearn and say things to excite the audience. Otherwise, they're wondering, well, who's this guy? Why is he here talking to us, right? So we need to do what we can to make sure the people we're interacting with know that we're bringing some real authority or expertise to the equation. A simple way, for example, for underwriters to do this. Most most underwriters learn their craft through credible sources. Many of them have a CPCU. If I were having a conversation with you as an agent, Nick, and you brought up something and we probably didn't see eye to eye on maybe how a coverage works, I could give you my opinion and you would contend with that because we all have opinions. But if I said, Nick, that's a great question. And I remember when I was studying my CPCU, this came up and the instructor talked about, and I begin to give that answer, that totally changes the communication, because CPCU is a credible authority and you're far less likely to contend with that, but you'll contend all day long with my opinion if it doesn't line up.
Yeah.
So that's a simple way.
And there's a proactive way you can use this as well, right? So this is, I'm taking notes as you're talking, and I'm thinking of situations where carriers could use their claims professionals, their underwriting professionals, maybe loss control that's within the organization, and proactively reach out to policyholders and agencies to teach their policyholders about, hey, if you do these certain things, you will reduce loss. You know, these types of wind shutters are better than these other types. These types of roof coverings protect from hail better than these other types. Like, I think there's a way that, and you can almost kill two birds with one stone. You can, by giving, so reciprocity a little bit, by giving and training people on that information and giving it away, it shows your authority, your expertise in it. And even if you got nothing back, it's still something that's of value to them. That's kind of the note that I took, is just like the claims expertise to policyholders, I think would be immensely valuable to show the expertise.
And a lot of that is how you set that up too. So if I were an agent, Nick, and I wrote your policy, and then all of a sudden you start getting these emails about, you know, roof covering and stuff, you may read them or you may not. But the persuasive agent, the smart agent's going to have a conversation to set that up. And so, you know, we're finishing up the paperwork, and I might say, you know, Nick, one of the things that the majority of our policyholders really appreciate is we give them information so they really understand about insurance, and they understand some things they can do to prevent loss. And we do that through an email. Would you like to get that email? Well, I've referenced most of our customers, right? That's what we call social proof. You're thinking, well, if everybody else is getting the email, I probably should too. It's an opportunity for me to then really engage reciprocity because I've asked and you've said you wanted it. And so now you're receiving it kind of as a gift. And all of a sudden, when those emails come in, you respond to them differently because you gave me permission, you know what they're about, and you probably read them. Much more effective than just blanket shooting all these emails out and expecting that customers are going to respond positively to that. So these are the little things that when people really start understanding influence, they engage people differently. And it's amazing the difference in the results they can get.
Yeah, it's very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that. What after authority, what other persuasion techniques exist? I feel as though you're giving me. I'm rereading the book and going through this, so I love this. And for those that are listening, I will share a link to the book, but also like some summary material on it as well, so you can get a feel for just what this is.
Okay. I mentioned social proof. So social proof is that tendency that we have to kind of follow the crowd. When we're not sure what to do, we look to other people to see how we should be behaving in different situations. You know, when our kids are young, we called it peer pressure. As we get older, we think, well, I'm too sophisticated. I don't give in to peer pressure, but we do.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh yeah.
Prior to the pandemic, when you walked into an office, if you were working there, you probably pretty quickly conformed to the norms of that office. That's social proof. You started dressing in a similar manner as other people, you started using some of the same language, you observed, you know, what are work hours, so you didn't come in, you know, late or leave super early because you didn't see other people doing it. We are very subtly impacted by the behavior of other people. When you understand that, you start looking for legitimate opportunities to bring that in. And what I said earlier was, you know, Nick, most of our customers really appreciate getting this information so they understand a little more about insurance and ways to protect themselves. That's the subtle most of the people, and that has an impact on your thinking. Most of the psychology that we talk about operates at the subconscious level. So you don't have to literally be thinking, oh, if most of the customers at the agency are getting this, then I should get it too. But it's back there, and it drives so much of our behavior. So that's another one of the 6 principles.
This is amazing stuff for those. I know Tony Kanyas from Insurance Nerds has done book reviews. I'll make a note to myself, see if I can link to that as well. It's really powerful stuff, and I think I'm hoping for people that are listening, this isn't like an eye-rolling exercise, right? I think what you just described, the subconscious piece of it, is I think we take it for granted. We sort of assume we have this Lake Wobegon type of mentality that's like, that kind of stuff wouldn't work on me, or I'm not affected by that sort of stuff. But I think people would be really surprised at how easily they fall into these buckets, how easily they have been persuaded by others, and they continue to be so, and they don't even recognize it.
Yes, I mean, that is so true. When somebody says to me that stuff doesn't work on me, I just smile, because I'm thinking to myself, it works more on you than anybody else, because what you're admitting is you just don't even notice it.
Yeah.
But when I start teaching people about this, all of a sudden, when they start learning the language and they can kind of put a definition to it, they begin to see it more. They start to understand how the salesperson's trying to get them to buy, or the marketer is getting them to the store, or the politician's trying to get you to vote for him or her, because all of a sudden you begin to notice something that actually had been there all along, but you weren't paying attention, but it was affecting you.
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. The authority one, I see all the time. I've kind of caught on to that. And we saw it a lot during the pandemic, where it was a lot like the science says,
Yes.
Scientists say, right? Like this ambiguous being on that is the authority there, and you cannot question it because they are the authority.
Right.
And so those people were like, probably subconsciously as well. I hope it was subconsciously and not perversively, saying, I'm going to throw this in to manipulate people to sort of make decisions. But it's probably likely that it is proactively done in a more than subconscious manner, because it's powerful.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be beat you over the head with things. I often tell people, when you have a lot of experience doing something, it's very natural to say, Nick, I've been doing this for more than 30 years. And what I'm finding really works best is, right, I'm not bragging, I'm just subtly putting something out there. But that little statement about my years of experience, you might not have known how long I've been doing this, but when I casually and conversationally put it out there, it starts to impact your thinking. Because if somebody's done something for decades, they probably enjoy it and they're probably pretty good at it. I should probably follow their advice versus somebody who just got into the business. So all of it.
Go ahead, finish that. Yeah.
And I would just say, I always encourage people, you take what you learn and you digest it, and then you use your own language, your own conversational patterns. You don't want to sound like some robot, but you want to digest this stuff and recognize this is how people typically think and behave. If I can conform to that, if I can change how I communicate, it's going to make it easier for them to say yes. They'll be happy. I'll be happy. Everybody wins.
Yeah. There's just so many powerful areas to use this in, making the pitch, making the sale, but also like, how do you neatly overcome objections,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do you handle conflicting dialogue, where someone that you're trying to persuade is vehemently saying, no, I don't believe this.
Mm-hmm.
And like, there are very subtle ways to kind of get your message across the way that you want to, in your own way, in your own voice. Mm-hmm. And so I would highly recommend it for anyone that's listening. I will put links on the show notes to the books, to the material. You mentioned before we hit record that you had done something on persuasion and underwriting. Can you talk a little bit about that, and can we make that available?
Yeah, I can get you the white paper on that. Underwriting is a persuasive conversation. I mean, any underwriter who is listening to this, understanding that they're trying to influence their agent in terms of price and condition and other things regarding a policy. They're trying to meet in the middle somewhere where that agent can feel like they've got a product at a price that's competitive enough that they have an opportunity to sell. The underwriters wanting to get that product with whatever terms and conditions they need to feel comfortable at a price they think the company can make money at. So they're having to influence, and negotiation is part of influencing. So a lot of underwriters I found, in fact, I started in personal lines underwriting, made a very specific choice to not go into sales. They didn't want that. And talking about things like, well, you sell every day, truthfully, that's a turnoff to a lot of underwriters. They will push back on that and think, if I wanted to be in sales, I would have gotten into sales. But I do think they would agree that they are trying to influence the behavior of their agents. So it's a language shift, but it's the same psychology that you're using to try to influence that behavior.
Yep. Influencing a regulator, right? Like it doesn't end in, think of all of the constraints that exist around people who work in insurance, whether you're on the distribution side or the carrier side. There's always someone you either have to report to, or you have to, document information for a regulator, a rating agency, a reinsurer, like someone else that also has influence in your own business. And it kind of goes both ways. This was fantastic. It has rekindled a lot of my passion for this particular type of stuff. I will have all of that information on the show notes. I will make sure that document, the white paper, is also available. So Brian, I appreciate it. We'll have you on again, and I'll have links to you as well. So anyone that's listening that thinks, it's probably a good opportunity for Brian to come in and work within your organization, links to Brian will be in there as well. I would definitively connect with him. He's got good material on social media. So do that. Brian, thank you so much.
Hey, it was my pleasure. I love talking to people who understand this and like to geek out on it like I do.
Every day is a nerd fest. That's the way it should be, at least. If they paid enough, I would want to be a full-time college student. Like, there's nothing better than that. Just learning every single day. So I learned a lot. I appreciate it, Brian.
Thanks.